Welcome everyone to the third day of Selenium training. In the first 2 days, we have seen basics of C#, loops, arrays, functions and all. Right, so today we'll be starting with the object-oriented programming language. Now, object-oriented programming language is very important because the new version of Selenium, which is WebDriver, is purely object-oriented in nature. You have to learn object-oriented programming in order to learn Selenium, in order to learn the architecture of Selenium. In many interviews, the first question that is asked is explain the architecture of Selenium. Until or unless you don't know the concepts of objects, interfaces and all, you cannot explain the architecture of Selenium. Right, so we'll start with the object-oriented concepts first of all. So in this we will see what are local variables, global variables, then static, non-static and all. So let me create a new project in my Visual Studio, that is module number 3, and we'll change the directory and I create a new project. Inside which we will have a class named, say, static and non-static concept. Right, so first of all let us understand what is static and what is non-static. So now what does static mean and why it is there and what all can be static? Well, in a class, as we all can see that this main function is a static function. Now why? Because it has the static keyword associated with it. Similarly, you can even make your own functions, like for example I can make a function like public static void sum function. I have a function named public static void sum. Now this is your static function. Why? It is because you have the static keyword associated with it. Now what is static? We'll just tell you in few minutes. Alright, and if I make a function like public void send email, I have a function named send email. Now this function is your non-static function. Why? It is because it has got no static keyword associated with it. Right, so there are actually two types of functions, static function and non-static function. Similarly, there are variables inside the class as well. There's something like local variables. For example, I have a variable named I is equal to say 100. Now this is actually known as your local variable. This is known as, this I variable is considered as a local variable, that is inside the function it can be used. Inside this sum function only this I variable can be used. Local variables can be in the static as well as in the non-static function. It can be inside static or it can be inside non-static function as well. That means the life of this Z variable is only inside this send email function. Now there are something known as global variables as well. Global variables are present inside the class but outside the function. That is, they are present parallel to the functions inside the class, generally declared on the top of the class, in the very beginning of the class. Right, so here we would be declaring our global variables inside the class. I would be declaring my global variables. Alright, so global variables are something that are used across all the functions with some condition. Now there are some conditions. If the global variable satisfies those conditions, then they can be used across all the functions in a class. Alright, so let's say I declare a global variable, say string name, right? Okay, so this function is actually your non-static global variable. Sorry, this variable, this name variable, is a non-static and a global variable. Now if I declare a variable named static int age, now this is actually your static global variable. Alright, so there are actually two types of functions, static function and non-static function. Similarly, there are two types of variables as well, global variable and local variable. And inside the global variable also we have static global variable and non-static global variable. And there is something called local variable, inside which you neither have the static nor the non-static variable. You cannot declare the local variables as static or non-static. There is only one simple type of local variable. Alright, now if I say, suppose if I declare static in front of this, hold on, if I try to declare static in front of this local variable, then you can see the error coming up before for this static keyword. It says that the modifier static is not valid for this item. Right, now what actually is this static? You will get it clear when we'll create a new class and explain the concepts of the objects. Okay, so we'll just cater to this static keyword as well in few minutes. Now there are some rules associated with this as well. That is you say that static function can only access the static stuff. Static function can only access the static stuff. Alright, it can only access the static global variable and static functions. Okay, that is like this sum is your static function, right? And then if like the static is not supported for the local variable, so I can just remove it, and then I say that static functions can only access the static stuff. So now for example, this sum is your static function, right? So this sum function can be called inside your static main function, but you cannot call the send email function inside your main function. You cannot call the send email in the main function. Why? It is because this send email is a non-static function. I told you static functions can only access the static stuff. This main is a static function, so it can only access the sum function, not the send email, which is a non-static function. Similarly, you can access the static variable age, but you cannot access the you can access the static variable age, but you cannot access the name variable inside your main function. Alright, so this is what is the concept of the static, and then there is no rule associated with the non-static stuff. For example, in my send email function, okay, in my send email function, say suppose if I try to access the sum function, which is a static function, I can very easily do that. Similarly, I can even access the static variable age inside my non-static function. Okay, I will not get any error in this case. So the rule is static can only access the static stuff. But why it is like that? Let's go into much deep for this reason. So what I'll do is let me just remove this code as of now, and then let me create a new class. Say for example I have a class named car. Okay, a very simple, a very basic example will be just discussing in order to understand the concepts of the oops, right? So now what I do is I have a class named car, will just declare it as public, all right, and then I can just declare some functions inside my car class. Now what can a car do? A car can start, right? So I have a function named public void start function, which is actually your non-static function, right? And similarly I have another function for my car class, that is your public void accelerate function, which is again a non-static function, right? Now both are my non-static except the like this is your in my car class I have two functions, start and accelerate function, which are non-static, and then so suppose I also have a main function declared inside my car class, so that would be your static main function, right? So this main function would be a static function, and other two functions are declared as the non-static function. Alright, now we just have declared the two functions of the car, start and the accelerate function, and then it has also got some properties as well. Like say for example I can just declare the model of the model of the car class, then similarly say the price of the car class, and similarly the number of wheels for the class. Okay, so these are the properties of the car. These are actually your global variables declared inside the car itself. Alright, now inside my main function I can do something known as creating the object of the class. Now how do we actually create the object of the class? By the keyword new followed by the class name. Alright, so this is how you actually declare the objects, by saying new followed by the name of the class. Now what happens in the memory is, now when we actually create the object of any class inside the memory, what is gonna happen is that inside the memory the object of the car class would be created. There will be memory location associated with that object, okay, and in this object all the non-static stuff would be residing over here. Alright, so then in this case I will have the access to my model variable, then you have a price variable, then you have wheels variable declared, right? Plus you have two functions declared, start function and the accelerate function. These are the two functions declared, are present inside the car class, right? So then if I create three objects of my car class, similarly I have another object of my car class, then what will happen is that three objects will be taking its position inside the memory. Three objects would be created inside the memory, something like this, right? Now why do we actually create the object? Let me just remove the other two objects. Okay, now what happens is that how do we can also say car C1 is equal to new car. Now this is actually your object. This C1 is the reference to the object. C1 is not the object, it is the reference pointing towards the object of the car class. Okay, Now many people think that C1 is the object. C1 is the object of my car class. No, what happens is that this is the object of the car class, right? So then when you say car C1 is equal to new C1, so then C1 is the reference which is pointing towards the object of the car class. Alright, okay, so then this car object C1, it can access all the non-static things with the C1 object. That is, you say C1 dot model, I want to access the model, okay, and then I give any value over here. Similarly, you can also access the price variable, so you have something, a price for the car, right? Then similarly I have the number of wheels declared, say it is 4, okay, right? And then similarly you can even access the two functions as well, that is your start function as well as the accelerate function. So these are the two functions declared, right? Okay, so inside, so by just creating the object of the car class, you can access all the properties of that very particular class. Similarly, I can create one more object of my car class, that would be your car C2 is equal to new car. I create one more object, and similarly with this second object as well, you can access the model as well as the price and all the other stuff. You can just access the all the properties of the car class very easily, right? Similarly, I have the wheels for my class, and similarly I can even call the start as well as the accelerate function for my second class. Alright, so this is how are we actually handling the object. So what happens inside the memory is we now have two objects of the car class, and both the objects would be having the all the properties and the functions declared for both the classes. That would be your model, then you have the price, and then you have the wheels, right? Similarly, we have the start function as well as the accelerate function, and similarly for the second object as well, we will have all the same properties, model, price, wheels, start and accelerate function declared for the other object as well. Other function as well, right? So I can simply right now, if I want to access, if I want to get the value, read the value of the model for the first class, so I can simply read that by just writing console dot write line and just get me the value for the model of the first class, right? And similarly, if you want to get the model of the second class as well, then we can do that as well. Console dot write line C2 dot model, just get me the value of the model for the second class, and I write console dot read key as well to read the output, right? So then now let me just comment out this main function, or else what we will do is, let's just change from the properties itself. So I will make the car class as my startup class, will save the changes, and then now if I say run my code, so then you see that it prints the model for the first as well as the second car, right? So fine, so then these are the two objects declared inside the memory. The first one is your C1 object, which is pointing towards the first object, and second is your C2, which is pointing towards the second object inside the memory. Alright, similarly we can even print the other properties as well. If I want to print the price of the second car, right, and similarly the price of the first car as well, so I can even print that also. Alright, so there's something known as virtualization. You just create the variable ones at the top, like you just create the we are just creating the variable out here, right? And then you can actually initialize the variables, access these variables inside the class by just by just the object of that very particular class. Okay, and then we can initialize the variables for the different classes individually. Like we are first of all initializing the values for the for each and every variable for the first class, and similarly for the second class as well. Alright, now I just told you about the non-static stuff right now. Now C2 sorry, yeah, now the car second car has got, I say that the second car has got 4 wheels. Like say suppose I am creating 1000 objects of my car class. Then we will have to initialize the value of the wheels variable for each and every object, but I know that every car has 4 wheels. Alright, so what I can do is, or else what is the thing is, now say suppose I have this start function inside my car class, inside which you can simply just say that particular model is starting. Okay, particular model is getting started. Similarly in my accelerate function as well, I can even write particular model is accelerating. Alright, and when I try to run this code, let me put a breakpoint out here. Okay, and then if I try to run my code, so then the cursor comes to this start function. Right now if I want to go inside this start function and debug this function as well, so I will hit F11 key, right, and then you hit F10 key. So then you see that the cursor, the control comes to the start function, right, and it will perform all the logic of the start function. So I hit F10 again and it will print the model value is AAA for the first car, right? So it will print AAA starting. Similarly I hit F10 again, then the cursor will move to the accelerate function. So I go inside this accelerate function and I will also hit F10 key, and then now the model is your BB. Okay, sorry, the model is same. We are calling the start and the accelerate function for the first car itself, right? So I hit F10 key again and it will execute your start and the accelerate function for the first car. Okay, so this is what is the basic example of what an object is. So you see that it prints AAA starting, then accelerating, then it prints the value of the model and the price for the first and the second car, and in between it is also printing the logic of the start and the accelerate function for the second car as well. Alright, so this is what an object is. Now object is something which contains all the non-static stuff. Now it contains all the non-static stuff. If you see, right, we have all these non-static variables declared, and with these objects we are calling the non-static variables. Now coming over to static. What is static? Now you know that all the cars will gonna have 4 wheels, and whenever I create the object of this car class, I will have to unnecessarily occupy the memory with the wheels variable. I know that every car has 4 wheels, but then inside my memory I will again and again have to occupy the memory for the wheels that is actually having the value as 4. So wheels is something which is common for all the objects, right? So what I will do is I will remove the wheels variable from every object of my particular class, and will keep the wheels at the common memory location. So how will I do that? I will do that by making the wheels variable as static. I'll say static int wheels. So now wheels will not be the part of the object. If you try to access it from the object c1 dot wheels, you will not be able to access the wheels variable with the help of the object. Why? It is because by declaring the wheels as static, now wheels become the part of the class car, not the object. It will be common for all the objects of the car class. Okay, so now wheels will no longer be part of the object. It will be common for all the objects of the car class. Okay, so out here only I can just declare it as, I can initialize the wheels variable to 4. Now coming over to what is static. Now if in my main function, if I try to write console.writeLine wheels, right, and if I run my code, you see that it prints the value as 4. Now few minutes back I just told you that static can only access the static things. It cannot access the non-static stuff. For example, if I try to print console.writeLine and the price variable, if I try to print the value of the price, then you will get an error for this price variable. It is because price is actually a non-static variable. When we write wheels, we know that wheels is not the part of the object. It is common for all the objects. But when we try to print the price is a non-static variable. Non-static variable has to reside in an object. Non-static is the property of an object. So it gets confused which price are you talking about. In my start function, now I know that start is actually a non-static function. That is why I can access the model very easily in my static function, which is also a non-static variable. But static functions cannot access the non-static stuff. It can access the wheels variable very easily because this wheels is actually a static variable. Alright, so wheels can be directly called like this, or else you need to call it with the name of the class, car dot wheels. Alright, the name of the class name dot the static variable, the variable name. Alright, okay, so I can call it like this, fine. Okay, and then if I try to access my wheels variable by the object, I'll just show you that as well. If I say c1 dot wheels is equal to say 4 again, okay, so then I cannot do so. I cannot just do so. It is because I told you wheels is no longer the part of the object. It is the part of the class. Okay, so then you will have to access the wheels variable with the class name, that is your car. Okay, so this is how we are going to access the static variables. Static variable, that is your wheels variable. Okay, alright, so then I say that this wheels is actually a static variable, and static is common for all the objects of the class. Okay, now similarly I can even make one more function like I have a function named public static void fill gas. okay, which actually accepts the parameter inside it, that is the quantity of gas that has to be filled. We pass on the quantity of gas that I want to fill. Alright, so then I know that every car has got this property, fill gas. Okay, so I can call this function directly inside my main function, right? I can simply call it directly inside my main function, that is your fill gas, inside which I need to pass the quantity of the gas that needs to be filled inside the car. Okay, so I am easily able to access the fill gas function in my static function by just calling the function name, not with any object like we are calling it for the start as well as the accelerate function. No, nothing like that. We can directly call it with the function name, or you can call it with the name of the class, Alright, fine. So the static functions has to be actually called with the class name, not the object name. If you try to access the fill gas function with your object, then you will probably get the error. This doesn't mean that this fill gas function is actually not present inside your, it cannot be accessed for the first car C1. No, but it is a very bad practice to call the static things with the object. We never call the static things with the object of the class. So non-static functions have to be called with the object, with the help of the object. Okay, so till now we have seen what is static, why do we need static, and why do we need the non-static stuff. Now what actually are the objects? How can you create the object? What are the advantages of object? Now let us look into firstly why main function is declared as static in nature. Well, if you look at the main function, it is static in nature. We know that static things can be called with the class name dot the function or the variable name. So we can call the main function with the class name dot the function name, that would be your car dot main. So when C# is executing the code, it calls the main function without creating the object of this class. As we are able to call the main function without creating the object of the class, so the compiler, it's not mandatory for the compiler to actually create the object of the class first and then call the main function. It will just move further and it will just call the main function directly. Alright, so that is why it is declared as static main function. Now what is the difference between an object and the object reference? What is the basic difference between object versus the object reference? So let me just create a new class. Say test car. I have a class named test car. Right, now inside this test car, like I can create the object of the car outside the class as well. For example, I have say a main function declared out here as well, a main function declared inside my test car class. Right, now say suppose inside my test car class I try to create the object of my car class. Now I told you that you can even create the object of the class outside that particular class. Now I have this car class, I am creating the object of this car class inside my test car. Right, so this is your one object of the car class. Right, so then you have one object of the car class. Now if I write car, say A is equal to new car, right, so then A is the reference to that object. A is your reference which is pointing towards the first object of the car class. Similarly, say suppose you have another object declared, right, which is being and then that variable, that object is actually being referenced by the B variable. So this is your object reference and this entire is your object. Similarly, you can have a third object of the car class. Say suppose C is pointing towards the third object of the car class, right? So I can, like, say suppose car A is equal to new car. Similarly, I even declare one more object of my car class, and similarly I declare one more object of my car class. Alright, okay, so you can create as many number of the objects of the particular class. Now we'll see the references. What are these references? Now if I write a dot model, okay, fine, let me just declare these properties as public so that we can make use of them in the outside the class as well. And I have the price, and similarly I also declare the wheels as well as the public. Okay, now if I say a dot model, I assign any value to it, right? Similarly I also give the value for, say, b dot, hold on, similarly I have the model defined for my second car as well. Okay, and similarly I define the model for my third car, that is any model for the third car. Okay, now if I try to just print all of them, a dot model, similarly b dot model, okay, and similarly c dot model. Okay, and then if I try to run this, so let me just first of all change my starter class, will save the changes, and then let me just run my code. Okay, I need to put console dot read key to actually read the output, right? And then now if I say run my code, so then you see that it prints the model of the three cars A, B, C. Okay, I was printing the model of the third class 2 times, so that is why it was printing 2 times. Okay, fine. So this will actually print the model of the 3 different classes, 3 different cars. Now there comes one more point out here. Now say suppose if I write A is equal to B, B is equal to C, and C is equal to A. Now what happens? Please understand this concept very carefully, what actually will happen out here. Okay, now what modifications will be done to it is, now write like say suppose I have 3 objects. Right now you have 3 objects of the car class inside the memory. First is your A object. A is pointing towards the first object, B is pointing towards the second object, and C is pointing towards the third object, right? Now when you write A is equal to B, so what happens is now A, earlier it was pointing towards the first object, so what will happen is A will stop pointing towards the object where it was initially pointing, and it will start pointing towards the object where B is pointing when you write A is equal to B. Alright, so then A will also start pointing towards the object where B is pointing. Now secondly, when I write B is equal to C, so then what happens is B will stop pointing towards the object where B initially was pointing to, and it will point towards the object where C is pointing, that is to your third object. Alright, and then similarly when you say C is equal to A, so then what happens is now C will not point towards the third object, rather it will point towards the object where A is pointing. So now A is pointing towards the second object, right? So then C will also start pointing towards the second object. Okay, so this is what happened. So then now if you try, now again if you print the models of the different classes again, say you print a dot model, similarly you print b dot model, and similarly you print the model of the third car. Okay, now what would be the output for the models of the three cars? Let's just see that. So if I say run my code again, so now you see that it prints the result as B, C and B. Now how is this happening? You see, let us see the diagram. So when I say now first of all I'm printing the model of my first car, so now A is actually pointing towards the second object whose value is B. This is your A, this is your B and C, the model of the first, second and third car, right? So you are printing the model of the first car A is pointing towards the second object, so then it prints the value as B for the first car. Similarly you print the model of the second car, that is B, and B is pointing towards the third class having the value as C, right? So then it prints the value as C. And then lastly you print the value of the C object, the third object, which is pointing towards the second object again, so then again the value would be B for the third car. Okay, so then this means that object remains constant in the memory at a particular reference, at a particular location, but the object reference, it keeps on changing from one location to another location. But object, it remains this is your object, this rectangular box is your object, it remains constant, but the object references, they keep on changing inside the memory. Okay, so you see that this object, this first object has got no object reference, so you cannot access this first object. It will be destroyed by C# by a mechanism known as garbage collection. It cannot be accessed, so it will be destroyed. So then why to keep the memory actually occupied if it is destroyed only if it is of no use? Okay, so this is a very simple example of the objects and the object references. What do you mean by object and what do you mean by object reference? Alright, so then now if I say, for example, if I write a dot model is equal to any model, any value, right? And then now if I try to print the value of the first model, the model of the first car, similarly if I print the model of the second car and I print the model of the third car. Okay, fine. So then now we know that the value of the first car as well as the second car, they are same, right? First A and C is pointing towards the second object only. The value of the first and the third car is same, right? If the value of the A changes, then C will also change, right? That is, for A and C, x is common. So let's just print. You see that if the value of the A changes, the value of the C also changes with x. So that means if object is there inside the memory and it has got more than one reference associated with it, which it can, if any one of the reference changes, if it changes, the value of the one inside that object value is updated for all the other references as well. Okay, that is, for example, so this is your object inside the memory, right, which has got the where you have any variable declared, any value declared, right? So then these are all the other objects, the object references, which are actually pointing towards the single object. Alright, fine. Now let us look into the concept of pass by value and pass by a reference. So let me create a new class in my Visual Studio. Say for example, I create a new class named point, inside which I have two variables declared, int x and int y denoting the x and the y coordinate value of the point, right? And then I have a function declared over here, that is your public static void swap function, okay, which actually accepts two variables, two parameters inside it, that is your int a comma int b, right? So what will happen is, now this function will actually swap the two integers, that is what value you are sending into a and b, okay, what value you will be sending into a, it will be put into b and vice versa. And then we have one function, that is your main function, public static void main function. Okay, fine. Now inside my main function, what I do is I create the object of my point class, right? And then with this, and then what I do is I say have the value of the x variable, say assign it to 10, and similarly the value of the y variable is say 20, okay. And then what I do is, say suppose I print the two values, that is your p dot x, and similarly I print the value for the y. Alright, and then after that what happens is, like say suppose I call the swap function, inside which I need to pass the two parameters, the a and the b values. So I say pass p dot x plus the p dot y. I pass the two values, x and the y values. So then what will happen is, p dot x will go inside a value, it will go inside a, okay, and p dot y will go into b, it will go into a b, right? Okay, and then after that again let us print the value of the x and the y, okay. So just hold on, and I have this, okay. So then now if I, let me just change my startup class to point class, we'll save the changes, and then now if I say run my code, let's just see the execution and then we'll see. Okay, so now I say that first of all I was printing the value of the x and the y, okay. I say p dot x is assigned to as 10 and p dot y is 20, okay. And then after that, so initially the value of x and y, p dot x and p dot y would be 10 and 20, and after that I call my swap function, inside which we actually have to write the logic to swap the two numbers, and after that we will be again checking the values, okay. So I just ran it directly, we haven't actually written the logic to swap the two numbers, so that is why we were getting the same output, okay. Now what will happen is, now what I have to do is I have to swap the two numbers, okay. So say I have one more variable declared with me, declared, that is your int temp is equal to a, then a is equal to b, and then b is equal to temp, okay. So through this logic the value of a and b would be swapped. The concept is very simple. Now what will happen is, let's just see the execution. Okay, again it is the same thing. So what we are actually doing over here is, we say that we have int temp is equal to a, okay, a new variable temp which is being equal to a, then the value of a is assigned to b, and then the value of b temp is assigned to a temp variable. Now out here we are expecting the swap to be a success, right? So if you just see the execution, we can see that the swap is not a success. It is actually printing the same values 10 and 20 after calling the swap function over here. Now what is the reason? Well, actually the concept is very simple. What actually happens inside the memory is, you have two variables with you, x and y. Okay, you have two variables. You have created the object of the point class, right? Point class inside which you have two variables, x and y. Now and then you are giving the object a reference as p. Okay, then what happens is, you are passing p dot x into a variable, and you are passing the value of p dot y into a variable called b, out here, right? So basically what we are doing is, I am creating a memory space a and a memory space b, and x is passed into a and y is passed into b, and swapping is done between a and b. You see that you are passing the value of p dot x into a and p dot y into b, and then swapping is done between a and b. X and y, they remain the same, they are actually the same. So when you are swapping, a and b values are swapped, p dot x and p dot y, it remains the same, right? So when you are actually printing the value of p dot x and p dot y, you are getting the same values. So this is the reason why swap is not getting executed properly. You have to actually swap the values of x and y. X and y has to be swapped. The value of x should be put inside the y variable, and the value of y should be put inside the x variable instead of a and b, right? So in that case, what we will actually do is, we'll make a new function that would be your public static void swap value, okay, inside which we will pass the reference of the point class. We are passing the object reference of the point class. Okay, so then out here inside this we will have int temp is equal to t dot x. We have a new variable, temp variable, whose value is equal to t dot x. Then the value of t dot x would be assigned to your y variable, okay, and then that value would be again assigned back to the temp variable. Alright, so then in my main function I will be simply calling my swap value function, inside which you will just be passing your object reference of the point class, that is p. Okay, and so then this will pass the object reference of the point class. So there is a difference between swap p dot x and p dot y. Okay, in this we are passing the value, and inside this we are passing the object reference p into the t variable. And I am keeping every function as a static function because I need to call them inside my static main function, right? So inside the memory, what actually happens is you have this object of the point class inside the memory. Okay, so initially what was there was p was actually pointing towards the object of the point class, right? So now another reference t has also started pointing towards the same object where p was pointing, With the help of t, I am actually swapping the two numbers, okay, the x and the y. Alright, so now if you say run your code again, you see that earlier it was 10 and 20 for the x and the y. Now it has been swapped to 20 comma 10. That is, now the value of a becomes 20 and value of b becomes 10. Okay, why? It is because when the reference changes, when the t reference, it changes the value of the x and y. Okay, the value of the x and y would be updated to the newer value, and they would be kept inside your p.x and p.y variable. So t changes the value of x and y, and p gets the updated value. So this is what is the difference between pass by value and pass by reference. Alright, so this function is actually the example of the pass by value. Mainly the primitive data types like byte, integer, arrays are actually the pass by value only, right? And swap value is actually your pass by a reference function. Objects are always pass by a reference only. You can pass the object reference into the function as well, okay, as well as the input parameters. Now there is one more concept known as constructors. So let me just create a new class for the same. Constructor, and I add a main function to it, okay, and then like say suppose I have the object of my car class. Similarly, I have b is equal to new car, and similarly say I have one more object of the car class, car c is equal to new car. Okay, so when I actually initialize three objects of my car class, they have to actually initialize all the properties of the car class. That is your a dot model, that is, it would be a we have to actually initialize it in a function. Inside the function, say I have a function, main function, okay, and then say suppose that is a dot model is equal to, you give any model, say Mercedes. Similarly, you give the price of the first car, say any price, okay, and similarly the model of the second as well as the third car, right? Then similarly say b dot model is equal to any model, say Honda City, right, and the price of the second car would be any price, okay, and similarly the model of the third car, say Maruti, okay, and the price for the third car. Alright, now suppose instead of the two properties out here, you have 10 properties of the objects of the car class. Now whenever we create an object, we have to write 10 different lines, so it becomes an overhead that you create object, and that too in each and every separate line inside your code. You have to initialize the properties inside the object as well. So that is why we use something known as constructor. Now in my car class, in my in my car class, above my main function, I will make a constructor of the car class. Now what is a constructor? Constructor is something which is having the same name as that of the class name. That is, your constructor would be public car, and inside which you can pass the parameters. Okay, so suppose you have string m comma int p. Alright, so constructor, it will look similar to a function. It looks similar to a function, but it is not a function. There is no static, no non-static, no void, and nothing is there. Any return type, nothing is present for a constructor. You just have the access specifier and the name of the class, and then you can pass any parameters inside the constructor. Right, so this constructor has actually got two parameters, and then it takes two parameters, so I can simply say that model is equal to m and price is equal to p. Alright, so we'll tell you now why am I doing this. You'll get to know in some time. So when you actually create the constructor, it will start getting, you will start getting error, in your main function for the constructor class out here. You'll start getting error for here. So what we will do is, let's just comment the constructor for the time being. Let me just comment this constructor for the time being, and then we'll make another constructor over here that would be your public car, and we create a simple constructor of the car class with no parameters declared inside it. Okay, and then out here inside my constructor, let me just print a simple line in car constructor. Let me just put a single line, a car constructor in car constructor, right? And then in my main function out here, I am creating, like, say 3 objects of the car class, right? So then what will happen is, when it creates the object of the 4 class, it will call the constructor of the car class, and then it will print this line. So whenever I am calling new car, it will first of all will be calling the constructor of the car class. Okay, so then if you say let me just run my constructor class, right? So then if I say run my code, okay, I think I didn't write console.read key, so let me just write console.read key. Okay, and then now I'll just run my code. So you see that it prints in car constructor 3 times. 3 times it prints. Okay, similarly you can even make a constructor with, because what happens is, when you are calling new car, it calls the car constructor which has this line being printed over here. Alright, now similarly you can even make a constructor with different arguments as well. Say suppose I have a car constructor with different argument, a string and an integer variable which is being accepted by the constructor. Alright, now this is known as method overloading. Same name but different parameters. You see, this car has got no parameters and this has got 2 parameters. So this can also be done with the functions as well. Constructor is different from a class. Constructor has no return types. Okay, now what is the role of constructor? Well, constructor will help you initialize the object. You don't have to write c1.model. Like, say for example, out here I am writing c1.model, c1.price. Okay, I will not have to write it like this. So we'll just tell you what we can do is, so coming back to my constructor class, like say I can create the car object, like right now I'm creating the car object like this, car A is equal to new car, right? So this, what will happen is, this will actually point towards the default constructor which is accepting no parameters. Okay, so it will point to this constructor which is actually having this line being printed. Alright, now like say suppose when I say print, when I say declare the object of my car object as car class as car A is equal to new car, and inside which I pass the value as, say, Hyundai, okay, and a integer value for the price. Now when I create the object of my car class like this, so then what will happen is it will simply be navigating to your this constructor which accepts the two parameters, string and the price parameter, right? So then what happens is, so now if you try to print the model as well as the price, okay, of the first car, and then now if you try to see the execution, you see that it prints Hyundai and 6576 for the price of the first car, because you see that this is actually your constructor accepting the two parameters, the string and the integer value. Okay, so in car constructor is actually called two times for okay, hold on. Yeah, so in car constructor you see that it is being called two times because this is being the default constructor is your this constructor accepting no parameters, and for the first one we are actually having the values being printed for the model as well as the price, Hyundai and the price. So now I can create the object of the class and initialize the non-static variables as well. Okay, same as we did it for the static variables. And then in Selenium as well, we will be making the constructor. We will be making the object of the classes which are predefined. Okay, now say suppose if instead of this m and the p variable, instead of this m, say suppose I have this like this, okay, say it is your model only, okay. So you, when say suppose you say string model and price, and out here also we will have model is equal to model, and then similarly we have the price variable. Okay, so now what actually happens is, now these are your local variable. This is the local variable model and the local variable price, and these are actually your global variable. So on the left hand side these are my global variables, model as well as the global variable price, and this is your local variable, right? So now if you try to run your code again, you get the result as null and 0. Like for the string the value is null and for the integer the value is 0. Now why this is so? It is because here the C# thinks that equate the local variable to the global variable, equate the local variable to the local variable, right? To like this is your global and this is your local variable, both the values are getting equated. So global variable never comes into picture. Like what we are doing is we are saying that model is equal to model, this is your local variable, and then you are equating it to the local variable. Global variable is never coming into picture. This is your actually your global variable. Okay, local variable is actually hiding the global variable because the name of both the variables is same. So in this case we use something known as this dot model, right? And similarly we have this dot price is equal to price. So this dot model means the model of the car, and this dot price means the price of the car. Now what is this? This is the keyword which will always point towards the current object whenever the object is calling the constructor. So this is all about the fundamentals of the OOPS programming language, the object oriented programming language. So we are done with the OOPS concepts, right? So now in the end, let me just give you a small example of how the objects are used in Selenium. Okay, so what we will do is let us just create a new class. Say it is your Selenium basics, right? And then we'll just create a main function out here. Okay, and we'll have to configure the Selenium DLLs as well, so we'll be adding it from the Nugget package manager. So as of now, don't worry about what are these DLLs, what are these WebDriver DLLs, that I'll be just adding it into my project. So right now I'm just telling you, I'm just showcasing it to you, the basic script to just launch the browsers, the different browsers, right? So for that I will have to add the WebDriver DLL in my project, so I'll be adding it from my Nugget package manager. We'll click on OK. So how will you actually configure these DLLs? I will be telling you these as well in the coming classes. Okay, so right now I'm just making a small Selenium program which opens up the browser. It will take you to a website then, right? So then what happens is, like say suppose I have a class Selenium basics, and then right, say suppose I have the Chrome driver class with me, for which I will have to import the namespace using openqt.selenium.chrome, and then I create the object of my Chrome driver class, right? And inside which you need to pass the path of the chrome.exe, right? So chrome.exe, it can be simply downloaded from the official website, or else I have it already out here. Chrome driver.exe will be giving the path of the exe file inside the constructor of my Chrome driver class, right? So I have this, and then what happens is, now this is actually CD is the object of the Chrome driver. This is the object reference which is pointing towards the object of the Chrome driver class, right? So now if you say try to run your code, we'll just make the changes, and then if I try to run my code, so then now what would happen is, you see that it has launched a blank Chrome browser, and inside this, so now you have successfully launched the browser. Now next what we can do is, now inside this object of the Chrome driver class, we have lot of non-static functions which we will be studying about in the course. Say for example, one of the main function is your URL function. You, after you open the browser, you need to navigate to a particular URL, right? So you simply specify the URL you want to navigate to. Say google.com I want to navigate to. So this will actually, the Chrome browser will be navigated to google.com. So this is where C# is important, how you create the objects and how are you actually calling the different functions with the help of the object, right? So then you see that it launches the Chrome browser and then it navigates to google.com as well. So you know what this line Chrome driver CD is equal to new Chrome driver is doing. This line is actually creating the object of the Chrome driver class, and after that we can make use of lot of functions from this object CD object which is being declared at the top. Similarly for the Firefox driver as well, will be doing the same stuff, and similarly for the IE driver also we will be launching the browser, and then we will be calling the different functions present inside this driver class. So right now this is just the small script, just the small Selenium script which is actually telling you how to actually launch the different browsers and how then next you can perform the different actions to it.